This is also a time of change for my family.
Sandringham had survived scandals, whispers, divorces, and decades of carefully managed royal tension. But this Christmas, one quiet signature turned tradition into a weapon. Sarah Ferguson was not simply left out. Her name was removed from the Sandringham Christmas list after King Charles signed the final approval himself. And inside the palace, that single act landed like a door closing on the past forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence carried the first warning. Sandringham Christmas, the royal family's private holiday gathering at the King's Norfolk estate, had always meant more than dinner, church, and polished tradition. An invitation there told the world who still belonged close to the crown. A missing name told the world something colder. Sarah knew that. Charles knew it too. And that was why the decision cut deeper than any public statement ever could. Sarah had lived for years in the strange space between family and exile. She was no longer a royal wife, yet she remained the mother of Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, two women whose lives still carried the weight of palace bloodlines. Prince Andrew made her place even more complicated. He was her past, her bond, her burden, and her shadow. Wherever he stood in the royal story, she was never far from the judgment attached to him. The message reached Sarah in a quiet room, and at first, she did not react. Her hand stayed still. Her face changed slowly, as if the meaning arrived before the words fully did. She had not been asked to step back politely. She had not been moved to a later arrangement. Her name had been removed from the Sandringham Christmas guest list, and the authorization carried the king's own signature. That was not distance. That was erasure. Charles sat with the approved list before him, and the room seemed to hold its breath around the paper. The king did not speak quickly. He placed his pen down with care, as if even the smallest sound might reveal the cost of what he had done. A senior aide watched the page, then watched the monarch's face, searching for hesitation. None came. The document was no longer marked for review. It was marked final. The aide understood what that meant. Final did not mean delayed. Final did not mean someone could quietly restore Sarah before Christmas morning. Final meant the palace machine had closed around the decision. And once that happened, emotion had little room left to breathe. Charles had drawn a line, and Sarah stood on the other side of it. The removal was not treated as a scheduling issue. It was treated as a royal boundary. And once that became clear, one question began moving through the palace in whispers no one wanted to own. Who had pushed Charles toward such a personal decision? But before the signature could be understood, the people behind the wound had to be brought into the light. Sarah Ferguson had been many things to the royal family. Former wife, mother, outsider, survivor, embarrassment, and familiar presence at the edge of royal life. Charles had been many things too. Brother-in-law, monarch, guardian of reputation, and now the man whose name sealed her exclusion. Their history was not simple. That is what made the decision so devastating. Sarah read the message once, then read it again, as if the words might change if she gave them more time. They did not. The Sandringham Christmas list, a private guest record for the royal family's holiday gathering at the King's Norfolk estate, carried meaning far beyond who would sit at dinner. It showed who remained close enough to be seen as family. For Sarah, losing that place meant losing one of the last visible signs that the door had not fully closed. Charles carried his own weight in silence. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution rather than one person, had become his duty to protect at any cost. He was no longer just a relative facing an uncomfortable family matter. He was the king, watching every private choice turn into public risk. That pressure mattered, because Sandringham was not only a home, it was a symbol of continuity, and Charles knew one wrong invitation could become another wound for the monarchy to explain. Sarah's pain sharpened because her daughters stood between both worlds. Princess Beatrice loved her mother, but she also understood the cold language of palace limits. Princess Eugenie felt the same pull, though her hurt carried more anger than restraint. Beatrice spoke softly when Sarah lowered the message, telling her to breathe, telling her not to answer immediately, telling her that one list could not define her worth. But even Beatrice knew those words were easier to say than believe. Eugenie struggled with the humiliation of it. She could accept distance. She could accept caution. What she could not accept was the idea that her mother had been reduced to a problem to be managed. Sarah watched her youngest daughter's face harden and saw the damage spreading. The exclusion no longer belonged only to her. It had entered her children's lives, and that made the wound more cruel. Prince Andrew's shadow stood over everything. He did not need to be in the room for Sarah to feel how much his name still shaped her fate. The decision around her removal seemed tied to a wider effort to contain his branch of the family, to keep old scandals from touching royal Christmas again. Sarah understood the logic. She still felt the sting. Being linked to a storm was not the same as being the storm, yet the palace had drawn no gentle distinction. Camilla said nothing. That silence mattered. The queen consort, the king's wife who shares his public life but does not hold his ruling power, could have softened the room with one word or one private appeal. She did neither. Sarah noticed. Charles noticed too. And in palace life, silence can sound almost like permission. William remained the name no one wanted to speak too loudly. The future king had grown less patient with emotional exceptions that placed the institution at risk. Sarah sensed his influence in the clean finality of the decision. Charles had signed it, but the prince's discipline seemed to stand behind the ink, and that made the exclusion feel bigger than one Christmas. Yet Sarah's exclusion did not begin with the Christmas list. It began with one private moment no one could forget. Every royal rupture has a moment people later return to. A sentence. A look. A pause that lasts too long. For Sarah Ferguson, that moment came weeks before the Sandringham decision, during a private pre-Christmas luncheon at Windsor, when a harmless toast turned into a palace alarm bell. After that afternoon, the family stopped pretending the old arrangement could continue unchanged. Sarah entered that luncheon believing warmth could still do what protocol could not. The Windsor pre-Christmas luncheon, a private meal held before the main royal holiday gathering, mattered because it allowed family members to test old bonds before the public traditions began. It was not the same as Sandringham. It was smaller, quieter, and easier to deny if anything went wrong. That was why her invitation carried danger. It gave her just enough nearness to hope, but not enough security to relax. Charles arrived already carrying caution in his shoulders. The king understood that every private gesture could become a public problem, especially when it touched Prince Andrew's branch of the family. Camilla watched the room with controlled calm, and the queen consort seemed to understand the risk before anyone named it. William said little, but his silence had weight. The prince had learned that even family softness could become institutional weakness when the wrong moment escaped into the open. Sarah tried to charm the table. She smiled too brightly. She laughed a little too quickly. She reached for the old ease that once made rooms forgive her before they judged her. But the harder she tried, the more the aides around Charles seemed to tighten. A senior aide later described the shift in a private palace note, writing that her warmth had begun to feel like a plea. Sarah did not see that note. She only felt the room slipping away from her. Beatrice saw it first in her mother's face. She knew that look, the brave lift of the chin, the desperate sparkle that appeared when Sarah wanted everyone to believe she was fine. Beatrice wanted to protect her, but she also knew how easily protection could become another spectacle. Eugenie was not in that part of the room, yet her absence made Beatrice feel even more alone with the danger of the moment. Then Sarah raised her glass. The room changed before the words were finished. Sarah spoke of family forgiveness, then mentioned Andrew's loneliness in front of Charles, Camilla, William, and senior aides. She meant it as tenderness. The palace heard it as pressure. That difference mattered, because forgiveness inside a royal room is never only personal. It can become policy, image, permission, and burden all at once. William's expression changed first. The prince set down his glass slowly, and the sound felt sharper than speech. Charles looked toward him, then back at Sarah, and the king's face closed. Camilla did not interrupt. She did not rescue the moment. Her silence gave the mistake room to grow. Sarah seemed to understand too late. Her smile faded at the edges, but she kept her head high, as if dignity could still pull the room back from the brink. It could not. Charles finished the luncheon with courtesy. Yet courtesy had become a curtain over something colder. After Sarah left, the king asked for the Sandringham guest draft to be brought back to him. No one asked why. No one needed to. The toast had done what no argument could do. It had turned an uncomfortable question into a royal decision. That toast did not merely embarrass the king. It forced a confrontation that could no longer be softened by smiles. The palace did not want a confrontation. Sarah did. Not because she believed the decision would change, but because silence felt worse than rejection. When she finally stood across from Charles in a private sitting room, no cameras, no guests, no public smiles, the question came stripped of performance. Why her? Why now? And why did his signature feel so personal? Sarah had reached that room because Beatrice refused to let the wound stay faceless. Her daughter had spoken quietly to a senior aide, not demanding a favor, but asking for one act of human decency. A private sitting room, in royal language, means a closed family space, used for sensitive conversations, away from formal ceremony. That mattered, because this was not a public appeal. It was a mother asking to hear the truth from the man who signed away her place. Charles agreed, but the condition was clear. Prince Andrew would not be present. The king wanted no bargaining, no emotional shield, no old marital bond turning the meeting into a defense of the whole York story. Sarah understood the meaning before anyone explained it. Andrew's absence was not an accident. It told her that the palace had separated her pain from his crisis, only enough to judge her alone. Sarah entered composed. She carried herself with the careful strength of someone who had already cried elsewhere, and refused to do it in front of the crown. Charles looked at her with tired sympathy, but sympathy did not soften the desk between them. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution that must survive beyond any one family argument, sat in the room like a third presence. The king was not only speaking as a relative, he was guarding a machine that punished weakness quickly. Sarah's voice broke when she spoke of Christmas. She said it had always been the one day when the past seemed less sharp, when old fractures could be covered by routine, when daughters did not have to feel divided between love and duty. Charles listened. He did not interrupt. Yet the king's silence made the pain worse, because it proved he had already measured that cost and signed anyway. Charles answered with care, but not with surrender. He told her the monarchy could no longer carry every personal history into every sacred family ritual. Sarah heard the word sacred and stiffened. To him, Sandringham was continuity. To her, it was proof that she had not been fully pushed out. That difference was the wound neither of them could close. Sarah then asked the question that changed the air. Did William want her removed? Charles did not answer immediately. He looked down, then back at her, and in that pause, denial lost its power. The prince's name had entered the room without being spoken by the king, and Sarah understood that the future was already pressing against the present. A chair shifted sharply as Sarah stood. The sound cut through the quiet like a verdict. She realized then that the decision was not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, and not temporary. Charles looked pained, but he did not call her back. Sarah waited one heartbeat longer than pride allowed, then turned away. Camilla stood at the far end of the corridor when Sarah left. The queen consort did not step forward. She did not offer comfort. Sarah saw her, and Camilla saw Sarah, and the silence between them said what palace language never would. The family had already moved on without her. But the confrontation only exposed the question everyone feared most. Who truly held the power behind Charles's pen? Power inside a palace rarely announces itself. It appears in careful wording, shorter meetings, lists revised without ceremony, and decisions no one dares challenge. Charles signed the Sandringham order, but the atmosphere around him had changed. William was not shouting. He was not demanding. He was doing something far more consequential. He was defining the monarchy he expected to inherit. William understood the danger before others wanted to name it. The Sandringham order, a signed palace instruction deciding who would be included in the royal Christmas gathering, mattered because it turned private family judgment into official action. The prince had watched too many old wounds become new scandals. He believed the next generation could not keep paying for choices made before they had a voice. Charles remained the monarch, and everyone knew the final authority belonged to him. But the king also knew that power was no longer only about the present. It was about continuity, meaning the careful passing of the crown from one reign to the next, without shaking public trust. William's view carried weight, because the palace was already thinking about tomorrow. Charles could sign the page, but the future king could shape the reason behind it. William spoke to his father behind closed doors, and his words were careful enough to sound respectful, yet firm enough to leave a mark. The family, he said, could not keep rewarding chaos with proximity. Charles absorbed the line in silence. The king looked away for a moment, not because he disagreed completely, but because he understood what agreement would cost. Mercy had always been easier when the monarchy was not bleeding from old mistakes. The prince did not speak against Sarah with cruelty. That made the moment colder. William framed the question as protection, not punishment. He wanted the children shielded from inherited royal damage. He wanted Christmas to stop becoming a stage for unresolved pain. He wanted the crown to choose discipline before sentiment dragged it back into scandal. Charles felt the strain of that argument. Sarah was not a stranger. She was tied to daughters he cared about, tied to memories he could not erase, tied to Andrew in ways that made every decision heavier. Still, the king knew the palace could not keep opening doors and then acting shocked when the past walked through them. An aide entered with 2 versions of the Christmas list. One included Sarah, one did not. The aide placed both pages before Charles and stepped back. No one spoke. The king looked at the first version, then the second. His hand moved slowly toward the pen, and William watched without triumph. The prince knew this was not victory. It was surgery. Charles signed only 1 page. The decision came from more than one man. It was the king's authority, William's boundary, and the palace's fear of repeating old mistakes, all meeting at the same dark point. When the approved version reached the household office, the machinery moved quickly. Names were checked, rooms were adjusted, calls were prepared. Sarah's family would feel it first. Not the newspapers, not the crowd, not the commentators waiting to turn pain into noise. Beatrice and Eugenie would feel the wound before the world even understood it had been made. Once the list became final, the pain left the palace paperwork and entered the lives of the people who could not escape it. Royal punishment is rarely announced with thunder. Sometimes it arrives as an empty chair. For Beatrice and Eugenie, Sarah's removal was not an abstract palace decision. It was their mother's name missing from a family ritual they had known since childhood. And when the new reality reached them, the hurt was not loud. It was quiet, private, and almost unbearable. Beatrice felt the decision before she fully answered it. The Sandringham schedule, the detailed private plan for Christmas meals, church attendance, room arrangements, and family timing at the king's Norfolk estate kept moving as if nothing human had been broken. That mattered because royal life often protects order before comfort. Names could disappear, rooms could be reassigned, and the machinery would still continue with polished calm. Eugenie understood that machinery too, but understanding did not make it easier. She knew her mother's exclusion would not stay hidden for long. Someone would notice. Someone would whisper. Someone would turn one missing name into a judgment on Sarah, on Andrew, and on the entire York family line. For Eugenie, the pain was not only that her mother had been left out, it was that the world would soon watch her absence like entertainment. Sarah sat with Beatrice at a small table, trying to smile in a way that protected both of them. She said it was only Christmas. She said families changed plans. She said the king had responsibilities greater than sentiment. But Beatrice heard the weakness beneath every careful word. Sarah was not explaining the decision. She was trying to make the rejection sound less cruel than it felt. Beatrice reached for her mother's hand and held it tightly. She did not offer empty comfort. She knew better. Her mother had survived public storms before, but this wound was different because it came wrapped in family language. Sarah could fight strangers. She could laugh off headlines. But being quietly removed from a holiday table by people who once knew her laughter cut in a deeper place. Eugenie's anger came later, behind a closed door, where she no longer had to soften her face. She was not furious at Christmas. She was furious at the humiliation that would follow. The crown, meaning the monarchy as a family institution and national symbol, could make a decision in private, but her mother would carry the shame in public. Eugenie saw the imbalance, and it burned. Sarah asked the question almost too softly to hear. Should her daughters still attend? The moment froze Beatrice. Because she understood what her mother was really asking. Sarah feared becoming a burden. She feared that her pain would place Beatrice and Eugenie outside the circle too. She feared that loving her openly might cost them their own fragile place. Beatrice's phone rang before either woman could escape the silence. A palace aide spoke with careful politeness, confirming arrival details, timing, and arrangements. The aide did not mention Sarah's name once. Not once. Beatrice listened, answered calmly, and felt the absence inside every sentence. Eugenie later heard what had been said, and understood the message immediately. The palace was not asking them to choose in public. It was forcing them to choose in private. Attend, and Sarah would be seen as standing alone. Stay away, and the removal would become a family rupture no one could hide. Sarah tried to release them from guilt. But a mother's bravery can wound as deeply as a command. Beatrice wanted to protect her. Eugenie wanted to defend her. And between those two instincts, the sisters stood at the edge of a decision that could either contain the pain or turn it into war. Yet in the middle of that heartbreak, one private conversation changed the emotional meaning of the entire decision. The turning point did not come in a formal meeting. It came behind a closed door, without aides, without notes, without anyone managing the language. Sarah and Beatrice sat together not as royal figures, not as names attached to scandal or tradition, but as mother and daughter. And for the first time, the question was not whether Sarah had been rejected, it was whether she would let rejection define her. Beatrice arrived quietly because she did not want another palace voice standing between them. A royal intermediary is someone who carries messages between family members and the institution, often softening painful words until they sound less human. Beatrice refused that role in this moment. She came as a daughter, not as a messenger. That mattered because Sarah had already heard the official version. What she needed now was love without palace language wrapped around it. Sarah tried to greet her with brightness, but the effort failed before the first sentence ended. She had spent years learning how to turn shame into humor, how to make rejection look like resilience, how to survive storms by smiling before anyone could pity her. But Sandringham was different. The king's Christmas gathering was not just a holiday invitation. It was one of the last private signs that she still had some place near the royal family's heart. Beatrice saw the truth her mother wanted to hide. Sarah was not only hurt by missing Christmas, she was grieving the version of family she had carried in her mind for years, the fragile belief that there would always be a door left open somewhere. She admitted it slowly. She said she felt erased, not only from Sandringham, but from the memory of who she had once been to them. Beatrice did not rush to correct her. That was the mercy. She sat with the pain instead of trying to polish it. Then she told Sarah the sentence that changed the room. Love and invitation were no longer the same thing inside the monarchy. Her mother was still loved by her daughters, still needed by them, still part of their lives. But the palace had its own colder rules, and those rules did not always know how to protect a heart. Sarah looked away when she heard that. The words hurt because they were true. She had spent too long hoping love would eventually become access again. Beatrice's honesty forced her to face what the list had already said. The family could care and still exclude. The crown could remember and still remove. Charles could feel sorrow and still sign. Then Sarah made the choice no one expected. She told Beatrice to attend Sandringham if she wished. She said it without bitterness, without a demand, without turning herself into a test of loyalty. Her voice shook, but the meaning held firm. She would not let her daughters carry the punishment meant for her. She would not turn Christmas into a battlefield just to prove she had been wounded. Beatrice began to cry quietly. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because her mother had chosen dignity where revenge would have been easier. Sarah reached for her hand, and for once, there was no performance left between them. There was only loss, love, and a painful kind of freedom. That private act of restraint became the one thing the public would not see when the story exploded across Britain. They would see the missing name. They would see the royal walk. They would hear arguments, judgments, and headlines. But they would not see Sarah choosing not to make her daughters pay for the door that had closed on her. But outside palace walls, restraint was not the mood. Once the news broke, the country turned Sarah's missing name into a national symbol. By morning, the private wound had become a public spectacle. The palace could control seating plans, guest lists, and official silence, but it could not control the image now forming in the national imagination. Sarah Ferguson alone at Christmas, while the royal family walked to church without her. The story no longer belonged only to Sandringham. It belonged to everyone watching. Sarah kept the sound low when the coverage began. She did not need every word to hear the judgment inside it. The palace response had been brief, polished, and empty, the kind of silence that says everything while admitting nothing. A palace statement, in simple terms, is an official message released to shape public understanding without exposing private discussions. This one gave no comfort. It confirmed nothing personal, explained nothing painful, and left Sarah's absence hanging in the air for others to define. Charles saw the headlines during breakfast and folded the paper slowly. The king had expected reaction, but not this kind of emotional heat. He had meant the decision as protection for the crown, the royal institution that must survive beyond every family scandal. Yet now the choice looked larger than a guest list. It looked like a public judgment on mercy, loyalty, and whether Christmas should ever become a place for punishment. Sarah watched one broadcaster frame the story as a cold new chapter in royal discipline. Her face tightened when Beatrice and Eugenie were mentioned, because that was the line she had hoped the world would not cross. She could bear her own humiliation. She had done that before, but hearing her daughters placed at the center of the debate turned the wound into something sharper. Sarah had tried to protect them by stepping back with dignity, and now the noise had found them anyway. Charles understood the cost in a different way. He saw how quickly people divided. Some praised the king for finally drawing a hard boundary around the monarchy. Others said he had made the royal family look smaller, colder, and less human. The monarch knew both arguments carried danger. Too much mercy could weaken the institution. Too little mercy could harden it beyond recognition. Then came the front page that made the story impossible to contain. A major London newspaper printed Sandringham's gates under winter frost with the headline, "Fergie frozen out." The phrase landed like a verdict. It was sharp, cruel, and unforgettable. Sarah saw it and looked away. Charles saw it and said nothing. Both understood that the missing invitation had become a national symbol. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the railings. Some defended the king, saying Charles had no choice if he wanted a cleaner monarchy. Others shook their heads and said Christmas should have been spared from discipline. A broadcaster repeated the same line throughout the day. This was not just about Sarah. It was about what kind of family the monarchy wanted the public to believe in. Sarah remained quiet as the argument grew louder. Her silence was no longer just pain. It had become restraint. Charles remained quiet too, but his silence felt heavier, because the signature was his. The palace had refused to explain the heart of the decision, and into that empty space, the country poured anger, sympathy, judgment, and memory. The family prepared for the Christmas walk while the nation kept watching. Coats were chosen. Timings were checked. The old ritual moved forward with perfect royal control. But control could not hide the absence now. Sarah's missing name had become a place everyone could see. When Christmas morning finally arrived, the verdict was not spoken by the palace. It was written in the space where Sarah was not standing. Christmas morning at Sandringham looked familiar from a distance. The coats, the church bells, the careful smiles, the slow walk beneath winter skies. But something had changed. Sarah Ferguson was not there. Her absence did not need an announcement. It stood quietly beside the family, shaping every glance, every photograph, every whispered judgment. And by then, the meaning was painfully clear. Charles moved through the morning with controlled calm, but calm did not mean peace. The Sandringham Christmas walk, the royal family's traditional public walk to church on Christmas morning, matters because it shows unity at the very moment the world is watching most closely. The king knew that every step would be studied, every smile would be measured, every missing figure would speak louder than any official statement. The family continued because the monarchy always continues. That was the old rule. Personal pain could bruise the heart, but the crown, meaning the institution built to outlast every private fracture, moved forward with ceremony and order. Charles understood that truth better than anyone. Still, the decision seemed to age the air around him. He had protected the institution, but protection had come with a human cost no polished tradition could fully hide. Beatrice appeared with careful dignity. Eugenie carried the same restraint, though her silence felt heavier. Both daughters knew the cameras would search their faces for anger, sadness, betrayal, or proof of division. They gave the world none of it. Beatrice held herself steady because Sarah had asked her not to turn pain into protest. Eugenie did the same, though the effort cost her. Their mother's absence walked with them, unseen but impossible to ignore. Sarah spent the morning away from Sandringham, and that choice became its own answer. She did not give bitterness to the crowd. She did not feed the noise. She did not turn her daughters into weapons against the king. Her restraint mattered because public humiliation often tempts people toward public revenge. Sarah chose something harder. She chose quiet strength when drama would have been easier. Charles's signature had done more than remove one woman from one list. It marked the end of an era when informal forgiveness could keep complicated figures near the edge of royal life. The old family habit of softening every fracture with access had finally broken. The king had drawn a boundary, and once drawn, it revealed the monarchy he was trying to preserve. William's influence stood behind that new shape. The prince's future-facing monarchy looked colder, cleaner, and less willing to protect difficult family history for the sake of sentiment. He had not needed to shout to change the room. His discipline had become part of the decision, and the royal family felt the force of it on Christmas morning. Sarah's dignity became the final image, not her exclusion. Charles preserved the institution, but she preserved herself. Beatrice and Eugenie carried their mother's pain without turning it into spectacle. The king carried the burden of a choice that could not be undone. And the monarchy carried on, changed by the empty space it had created. There is no unresolved mystery left at Sandringham. The list was signed, the chair stayed empty, and the monarchy made its choice. Sarah Ferguson was not destroyed by being erased. She was revealed as someone who could suffer the wound, protect her daughters, and still walk away with dignity. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.